welcome to Punching Up with Sean Conroy. I am Sean Conroy. I am punching up. I like saying things forwards and backwards, so there we go. I am with my sometime writing partner, sometime performing partner, my producer, somebody who I'm a big guy and this guy makes me feel small, and I mean that in a number of ways. Dean Sharp is here with me. Dean, I just want you to know that I dressed up for this occasion. I put on a button-down shirt. Do you think it looks okay?
Yeah, it looks good. I did the same.
Yeah, yours always look good.
I call this shirt mushroom. Do you name your shirts?
I don't, and I've never worn this shirt before. I was like looking through my closet and I found this shirt, and it's been sitting in my closet for years. It still had the tags on it. And so I was like, "Oh, let me see if this would actually fit me." And it kind of does. It's not perfect, but because we're only seeing, shoulders up, it looks okay.
That's always the best kind of clothing to me. Something you forgot about. Maybe it was a good cost, but it's just been sitting there, and you bust it out, and it looks nice, man. You should, keep it going. Keep
It
it in.
was it was the I couldn't believe it. I looked at the tag and it was $100. So I had this $100 shirt just sitting in my closet for I'm gonna guess probably a decade, just sitting there.
That's, I mean, with inflation rates, I mean, that's like a
This is like a
$1,000
two thousand yeah, this
shirt.
is a $2,000 shirt. But you got to look good. You got to look good even when you're doing an audio recording.
Yeah, got to.
All right, so we thought today we would do an episode where there are some questions. I mean, there's a lot of ways to describe this. A lot of people on the internet say something called an AMA, Ask Me Anything, which I think is a good term, but also it's always like, uh, ask me anything about this particular thing. And I feel like that's a little deceptive to say, ask me anything and then go, but limit it to this topic. But I get it because most people, unlike me, don't know most things about most things. So we're going to do an Ask Me Anything, a Q&A, I don't know what else you would call it, an informational session with Inquisition. Dean is going to ask me some questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. And just as a caveat, I don't necessarily agree with everything I'm saying, nor do I know that I will thoroughly be able to answer each question. I know I have like a Jeopardy knowledge of everything, very surface level, so I will do my best to answer these questions. But I do have these are all questions about writing and about television, and I've been doing that for a long time, so I feel like I do have some knowledge in that area. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, man. So we got a couple of questions from a couple of outlets, some people from class, some people from, the website, and we just reached out and asked them a couple of things that they would like to know from Sean Conroy. So I guess the first thing, and this is, I would say, one of the biggest things that people want to know about, because in everybody's mind, this is the key. This is the way. How do you get an agent when you're working as a writer? So how do you get a literary agent?
Uh, First of all, great question. And second of all, great setup. Because when you say this is the key, I think you're right. Everybody thinks once I have an agent, I'm all set. That person will get me jobs for the rest of my life until the day I die. And I just want to disabuse people of that notion because that's not how it works. It doesn't happen that way. Agents are more about negotiating deals that you get offered, and they submit people for stuff sometimes and so forth. But for the most part, everything I've gotten on my own and then gotten my agent involved. And the other tricky thing about that question of how do I get an agent is that nobody has the same answer. It's different for every single person. I talked to somebody recently who was looking for an agent, was, had some script samples, was at a wedding, ended up sitting next to a guy who was an agent. They had a conversation. Next thing you know, they're working together, you know? For me, I had already been working for about 5 or 6 years before I started working with the agent that I'm still working with. I've been working with him for a long time, and the way that came about was I spoke to some people on a show I was working on and said, "Does anybody know anybody who's looking for clients?" And one of my friends was like, "Oh, talk to my guy," and I went in, I met with him. It was him and another guy at the time, although the other guy is now gone. And we just had a conversation. We liked each other. We liked each other's ideas. And then we started working together. But again, he sends me stuff every once in a while and says, "Are you interested in this?" And people try to contact me through him. I mean, I've been working on this. I've talked about this a little bit before. I've been working on this show with people in Ireland, and they found me through him. In other words, they figured out who I was. I don't know, maybe like from Private Detective or something, but they sent the material to him so he could send it to me instead of sending it directly to me, which I'm sure has to do with legality. You can also just randomly send your stuff out to various agencies. That's always a possibility, but not a strong one. And I will also say the first agent I ever got, the way that happened was we had a film festival in New York City in like, I want to say like 2002 or something. It was before YouTube, before you could just put up whatever you wanted to. So our film festival was basically a VCR and a TV in the back of a bar, and we all went and watched each other's stuff. And I made a short film, uh, you know, if you want to call it that, where I just took footage from an old movie. You may have heard of the old movie. It's called Casablanca. And I took footage from Casablanca and I turned it into a short uh, called Rick's Birthday, where everybody was just saying happy birthday to Rick. And the Nazis sing happy birthday to him. I did all the voices of all the characters. It was like 3 minutes long. And somebody asked me if they could show that at their show. And I said, sure. And they did. And I was not at the show. And the next day, I got a call from somebody who said, "I work for this big agency in Los Angeles. My boss was at the show last night where they showed your thing. He wants to take you to lunch." And I did that. I went to lunch with this guy, and he ended up being my agent for a number of years. Um, so I don't think there's one right answer, and I don't have anything more useful to say.
Mm. So I guess talking about agents we ideally feel like could get us into the room. So I guess
Mhm.
that to the second question is what is the hierarchy of a writer's room and who actually gets credit for a particular show?
Again, I have a variety of answers. This could be an incredibly long episode because I feel like there's lots of explanation that goes into this. But if you're working on a WGA show, a guild show, there's a very specific hierarchy to the writer's room, which is, there's usually a PA who works in the writer's room, a production assistant whose job it is to you know, get coffee and clean up and make sure the pencils are all sharp and the chairs are all pushed in at the end of the day. Then there's a writer's assistant whose job it is to take notes when people are pitching on stuff and to write in the script. And then there is I don't know if this is still a thing, but people talk about a script coordinator whose job it is to make sure everybody, the actors and the director and the writers all have the same script all the time because things are always changing. Then the next person in the hierarchy is a staff writer, which is how I started in a writer's room many years ago. Was I was hired as a lowly staff writer. Um, and then I'm trying to remember. It's like it goes like staff writer, then story editor, then executive story editor, then I think producer, then or maybe co-producer, then producer, then supervising producer, then co-executive producer, then executive producer, then showrunner. So there's all these levels. And what does that mean when you're in the writer's room? For me, the only thing it ever meant was there were a lot of people getting paid more than I was. Like I didn't feel like because I was a staff writer, I was not allowed to speak at certain times. Like my job was to be there and contribute. And I think that's a thing that varies from room to room as well, where it's like, oh, if this person's an executive producer or a co-executive producer, they get to talk more than the staff writers. But I never felt that on the shows I worked on. Although I did not work on a lot of WGA shows, and this is sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, so with the staff writers, and you said it's a list of people above the staff writer that you was like, well, they getting paid more than me.
Mm-hmm.
Do all of these people contribute to writing the episode, or does the staff writers just write, and then those other supervising producers and do they just oversee things?
The supervising producer just watches the staff writer write the script. He just supervise. No, they all write. Again, I have not been on a WGA show in a while, so I don't know if the rules are still the same. But when I started, if you were a staff writer, that meant that you owed the show two scripts. You had to write two scripts for the show for nothing. And, you got your weekly salary, but when you write a script, you get a script fee on top of your weekly salary. And I think at that time, for writing a script, people would get like $20,000, something in that area. And so I wrote two scripts and did not get $20,000 for either one of them. I got no dollars for either one of them. But had I continued to work on that show was canceled after one season. But had I continued to work on that show and made my way up the hierarchy, I would have gotten that $20,000 as well as, you know, again, every time you go up a level in the hierarchy, you go up a level in pay. And that's really what those titles mean. When people, people don't, I think people understand it more than they used to, but people look at it and they go, why are there so many producers? Because everybody thinks of producer as like the way a movie producer is, which is like somebody who puts money into the project and whatever. But in television writing, it's just a title that means you get more money. And the other thing I was going to say is I then worked on a bunch of shows that were not WGA shows in which I had titles like producer, co-executive producer, executive producer, but because they were not WGA shows, that was, it wasn't like I definitely got raises, but it was nothing close to, what I would have gotten had I been working on a WGA show with that title. So, and I know, like for me, I mean, it's definitely a concern, but it wasn't something I ever really thought about. I know that there's some people who are like, I really need to know how much everybody makes and all that stuff. And I think that that information is publicly available. If you go to the Writers Guild website, you can find the contracts that people have that tell you how much each of those jobs gets. That answer everything?
Yeah, that does answer everything. And I mean, looking at our next question and talking about the pay, uh, the difference between WGA and not in WGA.
Hmm.
Our next question is, do all writers get residuals for a show they write on?
No. Um, Again, to go back to when I was working on a WGA show. First of all, when I started, I was hired as part of a writing team. And what that means is when you are a staff writer and you get hired as a writing team, you split one salary. So, in other words, if your salary is $6 a week, you each get $3. So that is a money saving maneuver. I mean, sure, there's writing teams that are, people who've worked together for a long time and want to be hired as a team and so on. I was hired, and the first day I went to work, I was told this is your new writing partner. And so for that show, it was a way for them just to have two people in the room and only pay one salary. That's not directly related to this question. I just think it's a weird, interesting thing about how they are able to. It's called a paper marriage, and the woman who became my writing partner was very beautiful, both on the inside and on the outside. We shared an office, and she was very easy to share an office with, which is not easy to do. And I can't say for sure that she would say the same about me. But we never really had to work together on anything. So it was really just for the paycheck so that they could split the paycheck between the two of us. It was still, by the way, I tell people that and they're like, oh, so you were getting, it was still so much money to me, even though it was half a paycheck, it was like, I'm getting paid what? But anyway, uh, does everybody get residuals? No. The answer is whoever's name is on the script is the person who gets residuals. So again, I owed the show two scripts that they did not give me a script fee for. But when those episodes reran, I got residuals for those episodes because the episode said by Sean Conroy on it. So for a couple years, maybe not even a couple years, for at least a year, they reran those things, and I would get a nice little residual check every once in a while.
Not to
But
talk
go
about
ahead.
any amount or anything, but it was a pretty cool residual. Like it was.
It's like I can't remember. I mean, look, for me, I get residuals now of like 4 cents, and I'm still like, great. I love residuals. But yeah, when you wrote the episode, you get a decent amount of money. Like I think because the script fee is $20,000, I think you get, at least a few $1,000s for residuals for an episode that gets rerun, maybe
Shrink.
even, I don't think it's half as much as that, but it's, at least a quarter of that. Um,
Pretty good.
Pretty good is right. I could afford a lot of these shirts with that.
Um, so our next question is, are there any particular shows that you recommend students watch or read the scripts of and try to analyze to get more of the structure down? What are those particular shows?
So you're talking about my classes, which I do have. Well, you know, I think it's worth reading and watching everything once you start to understand what structure is, because if you start to understand it, you can look at any episode of anything and go, they did do this, they didn't do this succeeded, this failed. Um, so I don't want to say like, oh, this is the show you should watch for structure. Now that said, I always go back to the classics because a lot of times those are the ones that are simplest and clearest. Like I think over the last couple decades, not in every case, but I think that because shows have become more serialized, where they're trying to tell a story that moves forward every episode, and less episodic, where everything resets at the end of the episode and you start over again. There are more and more shows where it's harder and harder to tell, oh, these are the specific beats of the story. This is what we're looking for in every episode. So when you say, are there shows you would recommend? I feel like, I go back to like Frasier, which always had a very clear structure. Friends, which I never watched until COVID. I was back in my hometown because I went to help out my family, and if you remember, there was a whole thing where you were supposed to like quarantine for a couple of weeks before you saw anybody. So I drove across the country and I stayed in a hotel in New Rochelle near where my folks live, and that was when I realized that Friends is on like 24 hours a day on various networks, on like I think TNT has it all day long and whatever. And I was like, oh, so I watched a bunch of them. And, I never loved the show, but watching a bunch of them, I was like, this is such a well constructed show. Like they really knew what they were doing in terms of structure. So that's a couple of shows that I would look to for that. And then, you know, the episode I always use as an example in my classes is the marine biologist episode of Seinfeld, which is season 5, episode 14. And I love that episode structurally just because they do such a good job of telling several different stories in very specific ways. And then the stories come together at the end. And it's just a really nice thing to look at. It's not a pilot, and I do teach a pilot class, but I think because it's an established episode, it's easier to see the structure than it is sometimes in a pilot, if that makes sense. That's what I got on that one. Anything else?
Yeah, we got just a couple more
Do you
questions.
like Friends? Are you a big Friends fan?
Oh, I love Friends. Yeah, big Friends fan. It comes on like at like 11 o'clock,
Uh-huh.
12 o'clock sometimes on my channel, and it's just feel good show, man. It feels like you know everybody, like the ensemble, the differences between each person, and that thing of how you can take either one of those characters and mix and match them in so many different ways and get
Mm-hmm.
a broad amount of combinations. Yeah, man, it's funny.
Just as a side note, you're absolutely right about that. And just as a side note, if anybody's interested, Google Friends pilot script, not just because it's worth reading, but the first page of the pilot script has a description of each of the characters in the show, each of the 6 characters, whatever their names are, Ronald and Jessica, and I can't even remember, but
Rachel, Ross,
yeah,
Phoebe, Monica, Chandler, Joey.
yeah. So they have a description of each of those characters that is both very specific and written very funny. And so they clearly had such a good idea of who these characters were before they started writing the show, which is hard to do. It's very hard to do that, but those people were experienced and they knew what they were doing and they did a good job. And like you said, you can put any of them together and something fun will happen.
The next question, I mean, it's a lot of people, not only writers, who's trying to figure this out, but how do I get better at joke writing?
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of people. The Dixie Cup people are trying to figure that out. The the ice cream people. Isn't there a thing where you have jokes on your ice cream sticks? Or maybe there was when I was a kid. Maybe it's not true anymore.
The bazooka.
Bazooka Joe, it's a little different kind of joke, but yes, it's how do you come up with a four panel comic strip that has a punchline to it? Um, it's joke writing is two things to me. It is both specific and technical, and it is spiritual. And so it's hard to like there's people, I'm not one of these people who's like, "Oh, technically this is how you write a joke." Like I know a joke is a setup and a punchline, but there's a million different ways to do that. I know there are people, and I'm actually thinking of one person specifically who have lists of different types of jokes, different styles of jokes. This is how you construct this kind of joke. This is how you construct this kind of joke. To me, that's a real technician, an engineer. And I've just never been able to focus on. But if you can look at, watch stand-up sets, watch what people do that gets laughs, and go, why are people laughing at that? I think that's a way to sort of start to understand the construction of those things. I mean, one thing I used to do, and this was because I was doing stand up, not because I was writing for television. Um, Although I will say, obviously, obviously doing stand up is a way to get better at writing jokes because you have no choice but to be funny on stage. I wish that were true because obviously I've seen a lot of people who chose not to be funny on stage. But I used to watch, this was before everybody had a Netflix special, so there was just the big shots of comedy like George Carlin and Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor, and I would sit there and literally transcribe their sets and underline the punchline so I could see how quickly the punchlines came up, what the punchlines were, why the punchlines worked, which I know is making me sound more technical now, but I really, I would not analyze it in terms of first you do this, then you do this. It was just like sinking in and immersing myself in this is how people are funny. The other thing I immediately think of is, like I said, there's different styles of jokes, and a style that I learned very early on that's so simple but so fun and maybe would be a good exercise for people trying to learn to write jokes is, you know, a list joke. And by that I mean, if you think about David Letterman's top tens, if anybody remembers those, and if you don't, I'm sure you could find them on YouTube or whatever. But the way those worked was he would say top 10, people who deserve to be punched in the face. And then and that's the setup, and then he would have 10 punchlines for that. So it's a great way to practice writing punchlines for a setup. I still remember very early on, I wrote a thing because I was like reading the paper and I read an article about a mafioso, I guess they call them, who had a weird nickname. And I can't remember what his nickname was, but I wrote a joke that was like, this guy had this weird nickname, but that's nothing compared to all these other guys in the mafia who have even weirder nicknames. And then I just went through a list of, Paul the Beekeeper D'Erico, Donnie, I'm just a big fat fucking idiot Brasco or whatever. Like each one was a punchline to the setup of this is a bad nickname for a mafia guy. Um, so I don't know that I'm really able to answer that question. I think, ultimately I would say immerse yourself in comedy. That's how you get better at writing jokes. And it's a really valuable skill when you're in the writer's room because I don't know if you know about comedy sitcoms, they're always looking for jokes. Here's one other thing. Well, I was gonna say, try to get as many, try to collect as many knock knock jokes as possible, which would have been hilarious if I said that. But it made me think when I was a kid, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I got a book, a big red book that was called Jokes, Puns, and Riddles. And I carried that book around with me for years and memorized everything in it. So maybe that helped with joke writing as well. So get a book called Jokes, Puns, and Riddles.
Um, that leads to our last question. When you're writing a project and it's and you're going through the whole process, however long that may be, how do we know when it's done?
If you are writing, can you say that again?
When you're writing a project or when you're, writing a script, when is
A
it
script.
done?
Oh, okay. So when you're writing a script, how do you know when it's done? Uh, the answer to that, unfortunately, and I feel like all of these answers are so vague and non-specific, but I guess that's the nature of writing. The answer to when is your script done is unfortunately never. It's never done. You can always go back and find stuff you want to change because it wasn't good enough the first time or because your perspective has changed or whatever. So it's never done. You just have to hand it in. I feel like that's the thing is if you have a deadline, you need to give it up to somebody. Now, if you're writing spec scripts and you're not working, then you have to make the choice to go, you know what? This is fine the way it is, and I'm going to leave it alone. And I think that's really important too, because what you can get stuck in, which I have gotten stuck in this numerous times, is tinkering with the same script over and over and over again. And I think that is, it makes sense on one level, but it's not particularly helpful because what's helpful is starting a new script and making it better than the last one. So to me, there's no specific time to do that, but I think you have to, because if you're writing a script, if you're writing a spec script on speculation is what that, I'm sure everybody knows what spec means, but I'm just saying like if there's one person, that's the person I'm talking to. Spec script means you're just doing it for yourself in hopes that someday we'll look at it. Someday somebody will look at it and go, this is really good. So if you're doing it on spec, you kind of have to just say to yourself, this is my deadline. I'm going to work on it for this long, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. Um, I mean, I wrote a thing this last week. It was not a script, it was an essay, but the person who asked me to do it wanted it by Friday. And I worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And I sent it in on Friday, and she was like, "This is great. Thank you." And then I went back Friday night and looked at it again. And I was like, "Oh, I want to change this, this, and this." So I sent her another email with a new version. And I was like, "Sorry to do this, but, I felt like I noticed a couple of things that I wanted to make different." And she was like, "Well, I'm not actually going to send it in until Monday, so you have until Monday. So I may even today is Sunday, I may even go back tonight and look at it again to see if there's like any little thing that I want to change in it." So, like I said, things are never done unless you have a deadline. And if you don't have a deadline, you have to give yourself a deadline and say, "I'm just going to leave this alone."
Yeah, that's it, man. That's all of our questions for right now. Uh, yeah, you got anything you want to say wrapping it up?
No, I mean, I apologize for the vagueness of all my answers, but again, that's the nature of all this stuff. Ultimately, I think there's no right or wrong. It's just a question of figuring things out for yourself and going, this is what works for me and this is what I'm comfortable with, you know? So clearly I am comfortable with David Letterman top 10 list style jokes, knock knock jokes, and $100 shirts. So that's nice. And you know, if anybody needs a supervising producer, I'm available. So um, let me know. All right. Well, Dean, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the reins on this one. Um, you know, it's great to have somebody else to talk to. Folks, if you have questions, feel free to send them in. Well, to send them to me, my email is sean@seanconroy.com. The other thing I was going to say is I write more about all this stuff. So if you have interest in knowing more about any of this stuff, maybe sign up for I have a newsletter that I put out a couple times a month about writing and writing comedy in Hollywood and writing sitcom stuff. So if you go to my website, seanconroy.com, you can sign up for that email, and I would love for you to do that. All right, this has been another episode of Punching Up. Thank you to Dean, my producer and my traveling companion on this episode. Thank you to Augustine Islas, another producer on the show. And we will see you next time. By the way, as I said that, I got a text on my screen from Augustine. So he must have felt something in the universe that we were talking about. Okay, everybody. See you next time.